wondered about the molecular composition of your rice and why eating it straight after cooking is probably not as good for you as letting it sit in the fridge for a while? No. Well, thank goodness one of us thinks of these things. Grains like rice are primarily composed of a substance called starch. In the same way that humans store excess energy as fat, most green plants will store their excess energy as starch. At the smallest molecular level, starch is composed of glucose molecules. Now you may have heard of glucose as in sugar, glucose syrup, or maybe blood glucose levels. Glucose is one of the most abundant sugars in the world, and it's an important energy source for all living organisms. Humans are no exception. But we're told to cut down on sugar and to eat more healthy grains like brown rice. But if grains are primarily composed of starch, and starch is just glucose molecules, then how are these grains more healthy for us than just pure sugar glucose? Our bodies are really good at absorbing energy, particularly in the form of pure glucose. The difference between starch and glucose, though, is how the glucose molecules are organized. This is a glucose molecule. It looks kind of like a ladybug at a rave. If we add a couple of these glucose molecules together, we get amylose. This looks like a ladybug invited a couple of friends to a rave. If we have multiple rows of glucose branching off from each other, then this is amylopectin. Amylose and amylopectin are more complex structures than simple glucose molecules, and this is why we call them complex carbohydrates. Our bodies can readily absorb pure glucose, but breaking down the amylose and the amylopectin takes a little bit more effort and requires enzymes called amylases to break off the glucose molecules one by one. As soon as a starchy product enters our body, these enzymes get to work. We have amylases in our saliva, and so you can actually try this out by getting a starchy product like a potato chip or a biscuit and putting it on your tongue and seeing how long it takes for you to taste a little bit of sweetness. The longer it takes for our bodies to break down these starch molecules, the slower the release of glucose into the body, and therefore the slower the rise in blood glucose levels. Foods that take a long time to increase blood glucose levels are known as having a low glycemic index or low GI. There are many reasons why a person might want to eat low GI foods. A diabetic might want a slow-release glucose, or people might want to avoid sugar highs and sugar lows. What I'm primarily interested in, though, is whether these starches can get to the gut, because here, gut microbes can ferment them, and this leads to an increase in a substance called butyrate. Butyrate has been associated with many positive health effects, including supporting intestinal barrier health, as well as regulating immune function and inflammation. So want to feed your gut microbiome with more starch? Well, a really good way of doing this is to eat whole grains rather than refined grains, and this means eating things like brown rice over white rice and multigrain bread over white bread. Whole grains retain the protective layer on the outside of the grain, which makes it harder for our digestive enzymes to access the starch inside them. These hard-to-digest starches are known as resistant starch. Another way we can lower the GI of starchy foods is to take advantage of a process called starch retrogradation. When heated in water, starch granules where the amylose and amylopectin are stored become hydrated, swell, and turn into a gel or paste. This is known as gelatinization. On cooling, the free-floating amylose and amylopectin chains gradually form partially ordered structures, and these structures resist digestion to a greater degree than the original structure. This is known as starch retrogradation. When this new lattice or network is created, in the body the starch is broken down at a slower rate than the original cooked grain. This means that the starch has a greater chance of surviving into the gut, where it can be fermented by your gut microbes. This effect has been seen many times. In a study by Ha and colleagues in 2012, they found that rats fed retrograded rice powder gained significantly less weight than rats that were fed regular rice powder. The rats that were fed retrograded rice powder also had lower levels of liver cholesterol, plasma cholesterol, and triglyceride content in their fatty tissue. Similar results are found in humans, where retrograded starch leads to a lower glycemic response than regular starch. So what do we need to do if we want to make our starchy foods more resistant? Well, if cooking grains, boil the water off. Don't pour it down the sink. The water that the rice is cooked in will have a lot of amylose and amylopectin in it, and this is what you need to form the strong network around the grains. Cool grains and potatoes before serving. Even if you leave it on the bench for an hour, this is going to have a significant effect on the development of this network. You can also put it in the fridge overnight or even for an hour. If you see a little bit of water in the container after putting it in the fridge overnight, this is actually a really good indication that starch retrogradation has occurred, as water has been expelled from the network. Finally, use aspects of the grain that are just naturally resistant. This means using whole grains rather than refined grains. This will slow the release of glucose into your body and give your gut microbes something positive to do for you.